Alex, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Dan, and as Alex said, I'm going to talk a bit about a trip that I took on the Pan American Highway. So, for anyone that doesn't know, it's officially the world's longest highway, and it runs from the Arctic Ocean in Alaska all the way to the bottom of South America. And there's a few difficulties with that, being calling it a road, but we'll get to that in a minute. Um, and so you can hear my accent. I'm originally from Australia, but I moved over to Canada about 20 years ago. And I was living in Calgary at the time, and a bit of a roadmap about tonight's talk. We'll talk quite a bit about my trip and the things I saw and the things I did. But I also really love to encourage other people to get out and do things like this. So I want to include lots of information and lots of sort of tips and handy stuff about what it's really like if you try to do something like this. And as Alex said, there'll be time for questions at the end. And down the bottom left there, you can see a map of the Americas, so North, Central, and South America. And there's a little red dot there. That indicates where I am during the talk. So the photo on the screen right now, that was taken in Kananaskis. I had just quit my job. I just decided to do this. I was bursting with excitement. And so that photo like captures how I felt just as I was about to hit the road. And so that little red dot is going to move on the map as I move south. So you can kind of correlate where each photo corresponds to. So yeah, I was living in Calgary, and I realized that if I wasn't careful, my whole life was going to go by with me just sitting at a desk going to work. And that terrified me. I said, that's not what I want to do with my life. And so I came up with this plan to quit my job. I kind of sold all my stuff, and I was going to drive up to Alaska. And so this was sort of the rough plan: leave Calgary, drive up the Alaska Highway, come back down the Stewart-Cassiar Highway, and kind of have a whole summer in Alaska of hiking and camping and adventures. And I didn't really have a plan beyond that. And then a friend sort of said, well, what about Mexico? You love the beach. Why don't you head down into Mexico? And it was a Calgary winter at the time, so suddenly Mexico seemed really appealing. And so I went down to the local bookshop and I bought a map. Back then it was all paper maps. And that map had all of Central and South America on it. And I remember going home and I kind of unfolded the map and I was like, wait, can I do that? And I did a little bit of Googling, and it turns out that yes, people have done it before and it seemed like it was reasonably doable. And so I came up with this idea of like, why don't I just keep driving for as long as I'm enjoying myself? And if I ever felt unsafe or I wasn't enjoying myself or I just wanted to do something else with my life, I figured I'd just sell my little Jeep and do something else. So kind of the whole plan was born, and I started really aggressively saving money and planning and kind of downsizing all of my gear. And eventually I packed it all up and it all fit inside a little two-door Jeep. And a lot of people are going to say, why would you take a Jeep on a trip like this? It doesn't seem very appropriate. Reason number one was that I already owned it. I kind of had always wanted to have a soft top Jeep, and so I had one. It was fun. It had never let me down. It has really strong four-wheel drive and had always gone everywhere I wanted to go. And it was only $5,000. So kind of for all of those reasons combined, I thought this is actually a really great vehicle to take. And if it gets stolen or it burns to the ground or, some unforeseen circumstance, I'll only be out $5,000. It's kind of not that bad in the scheme of things. And so for a trip like this, it's pretty daunting to think I'm going to drive 50 or 60,000 kilometers through a whole bunch of countries where I don't speak the language and all of that. And I know a lot of people plan this like a space shuttle mission, but I didn't have enough money to kind of buy all the fancy gadgets. I didn't have a roof rack or a winch or a fridge or kind of all of those fancy off-roading accessories. I just had my really simple old camping tent. I had a little hiking camping stove, a few things to keep me entertained, like a guitar. I did have a tiny laptop with me and a camera, and that was really it. I took some spares for the Jeep that I thought would just keep me moving. So, things like a serpentine belt, filters. If one of those failed, I could replace it on the side of the road and then limp into the next town. But the reality always was, if I blew up a gearbox or, something inside the engine broke, I was never going to be able to fix that on the side of the road anyway. So I kind of reasoned there was no point taking spares for that, and I would just have to deal with that eventuality as it came along. So it took about, I think, 7 months of planning and organizing, and I'd already been saving money for a few years before that. And then this was how the plan was born. And the idea was to just sleep in my tent as much as I possibly could and to cook all of my own food because I figured that would help me save a lot of money or spend a lot less money. Basically, I would just stop whenever I didn't feel like driving anymore. If I really enjoyed a place that I would just stay there for as long as I felt like it. Or if I got somewhere that the vibe wasn't right or I didn't feel safe or anything like that, I would just leave. So I had no schedule, no timeline, no commitments. It totally was open ended. When I left home, I thought it would take about a year, but to be honest, I had no idea. It could have been 6 months, it could have been 3 years. I was just going to go with it and see what happened and let the adventure unfold. I kind of have always thought that on a journey like this, the adventure itself becomes a character on the journey. It has its own personality. Sometimes I would talk out loud, not only to my Jeep for route advice and kind of, hey, where should we go today? But I would even sort of think about or ask the adventure. And I would say, hey, adventure, we've been all the way up to Alaska. Like, do you think we should try to avoid the snow and hurry up and go south, or should we stick around and see more snow? Um, and I didn't have winter tires on the Jeep, and so the first time I did hit snow, it was very sketchy. So then the question was answered. I needed to go south and avoid the snow. And so I'd been on the road, I guess, 3 or 4 months, all the way up to the Arctic Ocean. Alaska blew my mind. The Yukon is incredible. I loved every minute of it. And I'd really gotten into these routines. I've kind of figured out how to find places to camp for free, how often I needed to go into a town to buy gas and food, how often I needed to fill up my kind of drinking water tank. All of those routines and, setting up camp every night and then taking it down in the morning. I was exercising on the road as well, so trying to get in an hour-long workout every couple of days. And then just sort of how I was spending my time. I really loved hiking, so that was a big thing that I did a lot of days. But then also just like looking at museums or walking around towns, talking to locals, kind of all of those skills and all of that familiarity came in all the way through North America. So all the way up to Alaska, back down through Canada, into the US. I detoured to look at some national parks and things. And as those months rolled on, it really started to dawn on me that what I was doing, it wasn't really a vacation. It actually is my life. It's such a significant period of time. And that really sank in the more and more beautiful places I got to, where I was just camping out like this. 99% of the time I was by myself. So I would read a book, I would just enjoy whatever sort of was around, and make the most of this like simple existence where everything that I needed was inside my little Jeep. In reality, it probably could have all fit inside of a backpack. I just lived in my little ground tent, and it really was the simple life. Sometimes I would pay to stay at a hostel. That's the photo on the screen right now. And actually, this previous photo, that's a police compound where the police let you camp for free inside the compound, which is a really cool thing to do because then you're in the middle of a town. So then it's easy to walk and go and buy street food or go to a bar or anything like that, but you have a safe place to camp at night. So kind of all of these skills and routines developed. And then, of course, things changed dramatically once I crossed the border into Mexico. So I had only ever been to Tijuana once before on a day trip. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. I basically had no idea what I was getting myself in for, or I was intimidated for sure. You hear a lot of bad stories, and is it safe? Is this a really bad idea to go down there with this Jeep that maybe someone's going to try and steal from me? And so I had this idea that I would start out on the Baja of Mexico. There's a lot more English spoken, there's a lot more tourists around. I felt like it would be sort of a soft introduction to Mexico. And it turned out to be exactly that. And so people tolerated my horrifically bad Spanish. And I again got in the routines of like, what is life like in Mexico and sort of the rest of Latin America? How am I going to get around day to day? What words do I need to learn in Spanish? Just to hurry up and make it workable. And of course, once you're at the bottom of Baja, I didn't really want to drive back up again and around. So I decided to catch the ferry across to the mainland. And this ferry crossing, it took quite some doing with my terrible Spanish to try and organize and book and then show up and load the Jeep on the ferry. And you can see I slept out on the open deck of the ferry there. And bottom left, I'm chatting to some local Mexican truckers using my Spanish dictionary to translate. Um, and it was about now in the journey that it really sank in. I'm like, wait a minute, this is way bigger than anything I've ever done in my life. This is, intimidating, but also really, really exciting. And it felt like the journey was turning into the kinds of things that I'd read about in books that had really inspired me to do this. And I started to sort of get goosebumps and really think like, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. And I have a year or two of this more, in front of me now. And so while I was in Mexico, I really wanted to learn as much Spanish as I could. And so I volunteered at a couple of different places. I taught English at a place in Tehuantepec for 3 or 4 weeks. And the owner there of that English school, he had self-taught himself English and was extremely friendly, kind, generous. And so I camped in his compound, and every day he would take me into town and we'd buy street food and hang out and meet all of his old friends and just hang out with locals, which was fantastic. And then he took me to a wedding. He took me to a couple of different festivals. It was amazing to see, all the dancing and the clothes and the colors. And we'd go to street markets and buy like unbelievable amounts of kind of pineapples, watermelons, mangoes, like all the tropical fruits that we miss out on in Canada. And again, I really started to sink into this kind of like, I'm in a different part of the world and I should like soak in as much of it as I can. And then so I moved on from Mexico eventually and just sort of started moving south. And Central America, once you leave Mexico, Central America is actually really small. And most of the countries you could drive across in a day if you wanted to. Of course, I didn't. I wanted to slow down. My natural rhythm was that I spent about a month in each country, just roughly speaking. And so what that means is you end up crossing a lot of international borders. So on the entire drive, I went to 17 different countries, and every single one of those, there's a border where I have to deal with getting myself stamped in and out, but I also had to deal with the Jeep, getting it stamped in and out. And a lot of people think that this would be really difficult or really expensive, or, only people who work for National Geographic can do something like this because it's so hard. Actually, the polar opposite is true. Many people don't know there's an international convention. Every country in the world, except I think North Korea, they've signed on to an agreement that says if a vehicle is registered and insured in its home country, it can drive through our country temporarily with a tourist, no problem at all. So for 30 days, it's usually 30 days, sometimes it's 60 or 90, you can drive your Canadian vehicle right now to any country on earth. And it's kind of surprising. When you get to the border, basically you go to immigration first, and they'll deal with you as a person, whether you need a vehicle, a visa, stamp you in, make you legal in the country. Then they basically just point and say customs is over there. You walk over to customs and they say, oh, you have a car. Okay, fill out this form. And it's like, what's the make? What's the model? What color is it? What's its VIN number? Blah, blah, blah. And then stamp, stamp, stamp. Customs says, okay, you have 30 days to drive in our country. No problem at all. See you later. And literally that's it. You get in the driver's seat and you're free and clear to drive into that country. And so on the Pan American, I did that for 17 countries, and we'll get into it later, but I've done other journeys around the world since then. And so now I've been to 50 something countries with Canadian vehicle every time, and it's perfectly legal, and customs will just issue this thing called a temporary import permit. And that allows you as a tourist to have your Canadian car in that country. And then insurance is kind of a question mark. Some countries will force you to buy it at the border, and it's like $10 for a month. And some countries just don't even care, and you don't have to have insurance. So it really is that simple. And a lot of people think the borders would be like really stressful or really sketchy, with dangerous people hanging around. And that was not my experience. I think because I showed up fairly relaxed, I wasn't in a rush. I just sort of gave off that calm energy. And sometimes people would be like, this border crossing is going to take 5 hours if you don't pay me $100, but if you pay me, I'll make it go faster. And I would just say, oh, I don't mind, no problem. I'll just wait in the shade. It's not a problem. I've got time. And oftentimes people were so surprised at that response, they would be like, oh, okay, this is the next step, or okay, I'll sign your paperwork. Okay, you can go ahead. So I think having a lot of time really helped with the border crossings. But kind of the overall message there is they are not as hard as everyone would make you believe, and they're certainly not expensive. The next topic that I think a lot of people are really curious about is extortion from kind of corrupt police or military or basically anyone who, is looking to get some money out of a foreigner. Um, and it is true, as a white guy driving a North American Jeep, I did stand out, and certainly I did get stopped a lot of times by police officers who were looking to get money out of me. And the first few times it happens, it is really nerve-wracking, and I remember shaking and being scared, and like I didn't know what was going to happen. And a lot of these guys, they really do have guns. But as time went on, it became really clear to me that these people, whether they're police or military or border guards or whoever they are, this is their career. This is their kind of, what they do with their life. It's how they earn money. It's how they put food on the table for their family. They'll be willing to sort of be like, hey man, give me 20 bucks because you were speeding, or like, oh, your vehicle's not compliant because of made up reason, give me $100, otherwise it's going to be a big problem. They're willing to do that, and they'll maybe push it a little bit. But the idea that they would ever shoot you or hit you or put you in handcuffs or anything like that, it's basically unheard of. It doesn't happen because these guys know they would go to jail for the rest of their lives if they hurt a foreigner. Um, will they try to get money out of you? Yes. And if you pay them, they'll probably go away and leave you alone. But it doesn't mean you have to pay by any means. And so as time went on, I kind of developed this game where my goal was to make them laugh. My goal was to distract them. My goal was to waste their time. My goal was to pretend I didn't speak a word of Spanish. So they had to try as hard as they could to get money out of me. Um, and more often than not, 99% of the time, after about 10 minutes, they would just be like, go away, man. Like you're such an idiot. This is such a waste of time. Or, or they'd pressure me and pressure me and pressure me. And finally they're like, well, we're going to write you a ticket. And I would say, oh, that's okay. I have to go to the bank to pay it anyway because I don't have any cash on me. And they would be like, what? You don't have any cash? And I'd say, no, I don't want to get robbed. So I just have my Visa card. And you could see they'd just be like, oh my God. They're like, go away. Like, just get lost. And they'd just let me get back in the Jeep and drive away. Because if they weren't going to wind up with $20 in their pocket, they're just not interested. And so I really learned over time, it's be respectful, be polite, be really calm, and be friendly. And there's no reason to be afraid. And so on the whole journey, there were probably about 40 times that officers tried to get money out of me, and I paid once. And it's a long story, but it was a $5 for speeding, and it was getting dark, and I just didn't want to go through the whole rigmarole, so I gave them $5, and suddenly they were my best friends. So you certainly don't have to pay if you don't want to, and it is not scary. It is not something, it's the end of the world. It's really dangerous. It's not like that at all. And then so after I'd been on the road for a while, I started to learn that what I was doing, there's now a whole community of people called overlanders, and what I was doing is called overlanding. And so it's this idea of kind of drive across continents with your self-sufficient vehicle, with everything you need, all your camping gear, your food, all that kind of stuff. And I started to bump into people who were doing the same thing. And it was always an amazing chance to like camp together and swap stories. And especially if they were coming north and I was going south, we had all the information that we each wanted. And as I said earlier, there's a little bit of a problem driving the whole Pan American Highway. For those that don't know, between Panama and Colombia, so between Central and South America, there has never been any road built for political reasons, and also because it's a jungle. It's about 160 kilometers of swamp and jungle and nastiness. A few vehicles have done it over the years. The first ever was a Jeep, and it took them 741 days to go across that 160 miles. So yeah, 2 years to go 160 kilometers. That was not something that I was interested in doing. I didn't have military support, and I don't work for National Geographic, so that was off the cards. So what I did instead is I shipped my Jeep inside of a shipping container. And again, a lot of people assume that this would be really difficult, but it's not, because shipping agents and shipping lines, this is what they do. They're experts at it. And so I went to a few offices in Panama City and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. They'd be just like, oh yeah, sure. Here's a quote. Here's what you do. Go to this office, get this piece of paper, go to customs, get a stamp, bang, bang, bang. And a week later, and it was about $800 at the time, we drove it into that shipping container. They locked the door, customs inspected it. And then a week later, it arrived in Colombia, um, completely no problem at all. And I drove it out onto the streets of Colombia, and suddenly my mind was just blown. I kind of had thought about the moment for a long time, but then the reality of, wait, I am now driving in South America in my little Jeep that I was driving in Alaska. Like, I didn't really, I couldn't comprehend what that meant. And of course, the map of South America is enormous. And so suddenly I was almost overwhelmed of like, this is kind of too much to handle. I don't actually know what to do anymore. Like, which direction should I head? Should I go see Brazil? Should I just hug the coast? I kind of was feeling really overwhelmed. And part of the reason I was overwhelmed was because navigation suddenly got really difficult. So in Central America, I had no GPS, I had no phone, I had no like digital navigation. I only had the paper maps that I brought with me or that I could find along the way, and they were not very good. And so in Central America, there's kind of only one road most of the time. It wasn't that hard. South America, I got severely lost many, many times. And so I would often stop to ask for directions. And as my Spanish improved, I was decent at Spanish. And so for anyone that speaks Spanish, I don't know if you remember how to say left, you say izquierda. To turn right, you would say derecho. To go backwards, you would say atrás. And then to go straight ahead, you would just say recto. So, I'm asking policemen, I'm asking people in the town square. It turns out you don't need to know any of that. That's all a waste of time. No matter where you're trying to get to, no matter which direction it really is, the only direction you will ever get is recto, recto. So go straight ahead, just keep going, man. Which of course is not helpful at all. And of course led me to being lost even more often. But somehow I fumbled through and I always managed to get where I was going, usually late, but I wasn't on a timeline. And so I was feeling overwhelmed. And when I got down to Ecuador, an opportunity presented itself and I ended up managing a hostel up in the mountains for 5 months. So this photo is taken from the front yard of the hostel, and I'm looking at Cotopaxi volcano there. So that is the world's biggest active volcano. It has a glacier on top, and it's like 2 hours outside of Quito, the capital city. And the kids here from the hostel, they would ride to school on llamas. It was the most beautiful, pristine setting. And I got to spend 5 months with this as my view every day. So it was just incredible to be there and kind of not be on the road and just not sleep in my tent and kind of get my head out of that and have a break. And of course, I'd been looking at it for so long. Right at the end of my visit, I climbed the volcano. So it was 5,897 meters high. And you can see there in the photo, the crater behind me is the crater at the top of the volcano there. And there was a tiny bit of smoke coming out of the crater. I was really excited to see that. I got severe altitude sickness. My head felt like it was going to split in half. It was not fun. I mean, it was amazing, but I kind of ended my mountaineering career with that one climb. I don't think I'll ever do anything like that again. I love hiking, but altitude doesn't agree with me. People also often ask, what are the roads like? And the answer is it entirely depends on where you're going and what kind of adventure you're looking for. If you wanted to, you could stick to paved roads the entire time. And I met people driving the highway in things like VW Jettas and Mazda 3s, Honda Civics. You don't need a big four-wheel drive. You don't need, crazy suspension and tires and all of that. Unless you want to go having adventures off the beaten path. If you want to take the little border crossings, if you want to go and find the glacier or the lake, then all bets are off and the roads can turn into basically impassable by anything. And you never know what you're going to get. It's always an adventure. You can ask locals and their answer essentially boils down to like, you're only going to find out if you go and have a look. They don't have accurate weather reports and accurate kind of updated news stations that are covering when a bridge gets washed out or something like that. So it really was often just like, why don't you just go and find out? And so that mentality kind of seeped into me where I'm like, I would load up on fuel and food and water. And I would say, I'm going to try and go this way. And if I can't, I'll just come back and reassess and do something else. And so it kind of encouraged me to just go and have these adventures and see what I would find. And of course, no drive in South America is complete without driving the North Yungas Road. For anyone that's a Top Gear fan, this is also known as the Death Road. So this, for a time, was the world's most dangerous road. more people were killed on this road than any other in the world. And I have a video here from driving the road. I just have to change how my screen sharing works a little bit. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second. I'll open up the video and I'll share with you guys the video. So this is a video of me driving the death road. And I am commentating and I'm saying, bear with me. I'm going to hold the camera with one hand and drive with the other hand. And I had to do a gear change, which added to the whole excitement of the thing. You can see it's a really narrow road glued to the side of a mountain. And it is a 2-lane road, so cars are coming towards me. Although by the time I drove it, this road has been superseded by a major highway. And so very, very few vehicles, especially trucks and buses, they don't really drive it anymore. So it's beautiful and it's scenic, but it's not that dangerous. One thing I did in the video though was that I tapped my horn before I went around that blind corner, because often in Latin America, buses and trucks will just come around the corner in your lane. And so it was a real thing to like be on the horn and make sure that there would be a vehicle in my lane. So I'll just quickly go back to my presentation here. But that's what the death road looked like at the time I was there. Not nearly as crazy as it used to be. After that, a bit further south in Bolivia, I teamed up with some other travelers and we drove the Uyuni salt flats. So these are some of the world's biggest salt flats. And it was about 7 days of adventure here in this remote crossing. And at the time, it was the most wild remote adventure of my life. And I absolutely loved every minute of it. It was kind of what I dreamed of on the trip, being like really far out there, relying on my own skills, not being able to resupply easily, being self-sufficient, kind of thing that I dreamed of, and that really inspired me to do more of this kind of thing. Towards the end of the journey down in Buenos Aires, my family flew in for Christmas. And so we had a really great time with them, you know, constantly talking about how they had flown all the way to South America and I had driven there. And so that got endless laughs, and of course picking everyone up at the airport in the Jeep, and everyone got to go for a drive, and it was a lot of fun hanging around Buenos Aires. We stayed for a whole month. And then the bottom right hand corner there, that photo is physically at the end of the road. It's actually just past the barrier at the end of the road. And it says that Alaska is 17,800 kilometers away. So I'm not sure exactly where I took a wrong turn, but by that point I'd already driven about 55,000 kilometers. So it's actually not very far if you just stayed on the highway and didn't do too much detouring. And for me, one of the biggest highlights of the whole trip was all of the hiking that I did. And so I tried to get to kind of some world famous hiking destinations, and I've got a bunch of photos here from those. So this is the Magic Bus up in Alaska, made famous by the book and the movie Into the Wild, where Chris McCandless hiked into the wilderness, and he lived in that bus and then actually died in that bus. If you haven't read the book, I highly, highly recommend it. I loved it, and spending time at the bus was an amazing experience. Really, really cool energy at the bus. I thought it would be sad and somber, but actually it was the opposite of that. In Guatemala, I hiked up a volcano and I poked lava with a stick, and I roasted marshmallows on the lava, which is something I will never forget as long as I live. If you get the chance to see lava, it's otherworldly. It makes you feel like you don't understand how planet Earth works to see it in real life. It was really fun to like throw rocks in it and watch them melt. And the stick that I had, as fast as I could push it, it would just vanish. It was just gone. It was really fun. This is hiking around in the wilderness in Peru. That's Peru's highest mountain there in the background. I spent weeks up there by myself every day, just move the Jeep a little bit and then hike for the rest of the day, just looking around, seeing what I could find. I completed a really famous hiking circuit called the Cordillera Whitewash. And so it's 10 days hiking through mountains that look like that, with everything I needed on my back. And part of the reason it's so famous is that mountain in the background is called Silua Grande. And that's made famous by Joe Simpson in his book, Touching the Void, where he suffers a broken leg when he's near the summit, and his climbing partner actually cuts the climbing rope. And so Joe falls to his presumed death. And that is probably the most epic mountaineering tale ever told. And so to be standing there and that book, when I read it as a kid, I was just blown away. But then to see it in real life, I couldn't get the smile off my face for a week, I think. This is down in, that's Fitzroy, I think, down in Patagonia. I spent a lot of time hiking and camping around Patagonia. The southern Patagonian ice field is the second largest in the world. The scale of the glaciers and the amount of ice that's down there, I can't even put it into words. It is immense. And then that's Torres del Paine, probably the most iconic photo and kind of summation of my trip, a gravel road leading into the unknown. Um, and so I spent months and months hiking around southern Patagonia, and I went all the way down to the southern tip of the continent and then kind of wound my way back up to Buenos Aires. And I actually decided to sell the Jeep there in Buenos Aires, and that photo is taken at the airport. The new owner jumped in the driver's seat and drove away, and I've never seen the Jeep again. And so there's some statistics there on the screen about the trip. It took 2 years in the end. I only paid the one bribe, and I probably slept in my tent about 75% of the time. Other times I'd get a bed in a hostel or get invited in by locals or something like that. I commonly said on the trip, my Jeep is my novia, which is my Jeep is my girlfriend. And we all know breakups are hard. So it was a hard decision to make. And sometimes I regret it, but it was the right choice at the time. I had no money left. I had no options. It was the right thing to do. Some more trip statistics there. I had about 14 flat tires. So they were always pieces of steel or nails or something like that in the tires. They were cheap tires. I've learned my lesson. I'll never buy cheap tires again. I ran out of gas once. A couple of gas stations were closed in Patagonia, and I was impatient, so I just drove, but it all worked out fine. And the Jeep never broke down once. I performed a lot of routine maintenance, so oil changes, tire rotations, all the usual. Never ever anything else. Nothing needed to be replaced. Nothing wore out that you wouldn't expect. By the end of the trip, it needed new tires and it needed new brake pads. That's to be expected. But for a $5,000 little vehicle to drive it 64,000 kilometers, and then I sold it at the end of the trip for $5,000. So not only did it never break down, that Jeep was free. I think that was the right choice. So I was really happy with how the little Jeep went. And then in terms of cost, people always ask, is this astronomically expensive? The entire trip cost me $27,300. So in a strange way, when you break that down, it was about $1,200 a month while I was on the road, which is actually the same amount I was spending while I lived in Calgary just to go to work every day. By the time I paid rent and like food and car insurance and gym membership, a few activities on the weekend, I spend the same amount of money to go to work as I spend to not go to work for 2 years. So kind of it changed how I think about work and money and kind of changed my whole approach to life. And I became really addicted to this type of travel. And so since then, I've set out on some other major expeditions. I spent 3 years driving right around the coastline of Africa. I spent a year and a half exploring all the remote corners of Australia. And then now I have a wife and a daughter, and we just spent a year from Iceland all the way down through Europe and then into North Africa. And so our goal is to keep doing this kind of thing and travel the world and meet people and learn and try new foods and explore new regions for as long as we have the passion to keep doing it. And so right now we're home in Canada, we're saving money and kind of planning and dreaming for the next one, whatever that'll be. And so in a second here, I'm going to open it up to questions. Alex will jump back online. And if you'd like to learn more, I have written a couple of books about my journeys around the world. So I've got a copy right here. This is called The Road Chose Me Volume 1. So this is all about the Pan American Highway trip. Really expands on a lot of what we've talked about here tonight and goes into a lot more detail. And then I've also written a book about my 3 years around Africa. And so there's a lot to say about Africa. I learned a lot about politics. I learned a lot about how the world views Africa. And of course, I had a lot of misadventures along the way. I got malaria twice. I rolled the vehicle I took on that trip, stuck in the mud in the Congo, like kind of all the calamities that you might think would happen if you spent 3 years in Africa. And if you're interested, you can pick these up on Amazon. And so if you search for my name, Dan Grec, or The Road Chose Me, they'll come up on Amazon. And yeah, thanks very much. Let's open it up to questions, I guess, Alex.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. That was really interesting. Great to hear about your experience too, going through Latin America and all of that. It's yeah, really interesting. If anyone has any questions, I don't see any in the chat yet, so I'll give everyone a couple minutes, but
I guess there's no questions, Alex, because either I covered everything or what I said wasn't interesting enough to invite a
Oh,
question.
I think it was plenty interesting. I think you covered a lot. Yeah, I'm happy to hear you covered the whole extortion side of things too, because that's a question that I get a lot. For context, I'd lived in Latin America for a while, and that's a question that I get asked a lot. It's one of those common ones that people want to know about, right?
For sure,
Yeah.
yeah. I think, our media and kind of the whole kind of picture of Latin America is that it's quite dangerous and, it's
Mhm.
unsafe to travel. And so I try really hard to tell people what the reality was actually like. And I would say 99.9% of all people that I met on the entire trip were extremely happy, kind, friendly, welcoming. And they just love to shake my hand and say, welcome, and like, this is our town, and yeah, you can camp right there, and all of that kind of stuff. People were genuinely happy to see a foreigner and just to welcome me into their community or whatever it was.
Absolutely. Well, that's great to hear. Um, Oh, we've got a question here from John. He's asking where you went when you diverged from the US coast.
Ah, that's a good question, John. I previously had explored the California coast quite extensively, and I'm a bit of a hot springs fanatic, natural hot springs. And it turns out that Idaho has more hot springs than the rest of North America put together. And so I spent a good deal of time in Idaho exploring all the hot springs. And then I wanted to go across and see Yellowstone because I never had. And then I kind of ended up just going south from there. And I kind of avoided like California and the whole like population center because for me, I was kind of looking to be remote and wilderness and be away from people as much as possible. And I was spending too much money as well in North America. It's gas and food and everything's more expensive. So I needed to do it as cheaply as I possibly could. I'm just
Well,
trying.
I know it must have been a really tough decision for you selling the Jeep at the end. I can only imagine the connection that you would have had throughout that trip. That's pretty incredible that it never broke down either.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I just drove it fairly gently and,
Mm.
it wasn't overloaded is probably the biggest reason that it didn't suffer
Mm.
any failures. And so it was made to drive on bumpy gravel roads, which is what
Yep.
I was driving most days. And so, it was fit for purpose, I guess.
Yeah.
And I
Um,
do I daydream now about contacting the guy I sold it to and flying back down there maybe and buying it back. I
yep.
Yeah, I have dreams, and every now and again I get really excited about it, and then I kind of like chicken out and be like, oh, what if it's in a junkyard somewhere, or what if he crashed it? Like
Oh,
maybe I'd be better off not to know.
we've got a couple people here asking what year your journey was and when you made the trip.
Yep. So this was a while ago now. I started the trip in 2009 and I finished it in 2011.
Mm.
Um, and a lot of people are really curious if it's kind of changed a lot since then. And I really am part of the community now, and I speak at events, and I talk to a lot of people who've driven it in the last handful of years. Um, and it's a lot more common now. So I just spoke to someone who now ships vehicles across from Panama to Colombia. They ship about 1,000 vehicles a year for tourists. So at
Wow.
least 1,000 vehicles are doing it every year. And now there's a few apps on your phone, like iOverlander is amazing. It has all the campsites, all the wild camps, all the border crossings, and it kind of has all the information you need, like what paperwork and if there's corrupt police, there'll be like a little warning on the map. And
Mm.
so it's in a lot of ways, I think it's easier than it used to be. It's more popular than it used to be, and more people are doing it, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I actually was living down there at the same time, so I understand too. You would have been driving through quite a bit too during your stint in Central America at that time as well.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
a lot happening politically. Yeah.
yeah. And back
Um,
then, I didn't have a phone at all, so I would just go to internet cafes and like
mm,
once a week check emails and like upload some things to my website, and that was kind of it feels like the world was simpler back then.
it does. Yeah, yeah. Well, even seeing your packing list, calling it a netbook, that took me back. Uh, okay, we have a question here asking if you had any trouble with different grades of gasoline on your trip.
I never had a single problem. I did read before setting out, at the time, Brazil had a lot of ethanol in their fuel, and I was worried that that would cause problems with the Jeep. But I didn't go to Brazil in the end. And so to this day, I don't know if that would have been a problem. But no, on the entire trip, I always just, kind of at the gas station, you can really choose between diesel or gasoline. And so I was just always really careful to make sure that I was, the communication error didn't get that wrong. And no, the Jeep ran great the whole time. So I think fuel quality is not really a concern these days. A lot of countries were more developed even back then than I was expecting. I remember rolling into a gas station in Nicaragua and it looked 100% like a brand new Shell station in Canada. It had the fast food joint attached. It had the huge big lights and all the rows and rows of potato chips and Coke. And it was, it had like 20 pumps or something, all brand new. So yeah, I think concerns like that maybe were a big deal in the 80s or the 90s, but I think it's not a problem anymore.
Oh, that's interesting. We have a comment here from Carol who just wanted to say thank you to you and just commented that it was a very interesting presentation and it would have taken a lot of personal fortitude to complete that adventure.
Thanks, Carol. I like to say that a little bit of naive optimism helps. So I think you have to be an optimist to set out on something like this, and you have to believe that it's going to work and that good things are going to happen, and that did help and it did work.
Mhm. We do have someone called John with their hand up, so I'll just remind you if you have any questions, I'm not able to take you off mute with the webinar platform, so feel free to just drop any questions you have in the Q&A there. Robert's asking what engine was in the Jeep.
So Robert, it had the little 2.5 liter four-cylinder. So it's like the tiny engine for the Jeep. I think when it was new, it had like 80 horsepower. But by the time I bought it, I'm sure it was less than that. And by the time the trip finished, I'm sure it was less than that again.
Right. And then there's a couple questions just about your general feelings of if you felt safe during the excursion and that kind of thing. Questions about if there were issues with the roads in Mexico. Anything there you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, again, I think the media, and especially since my time in Africa, I really have a bit of a down view on the media. I think they really capitalize and they really jump on the bad stories. And so, I mean, yeah, bad things do happen. The cartels are in Mexico, and occasionally there are problems. But the very, very vast, overwhelming majority of people have no problem. And, they have an incredible time. When I got down to Mexico, I bumped into thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans and Canadians who either were living there or who go down there every year. And they're like, oh my God, I love this place. It's the best place on earth. Like this is, and they watch the media or they have their friends and family tell them how dangerous Mexico is. And they were just like, that's so not true. It's like we've been living here for 10 years and it feels as safe as where we used to live in Canada. Um,
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
think
I
it's,
can attest to that.
yeah,
It's true. There's a lot of depictions of things there, and even other questions we have here about kind of general conditions of the countries.
yeah, I think the media has actually done a really bad job of kind of keeping us informed about the reality of the world. What state of development is El Salvador in? I don't think anyone that hasn't been there can really understand that, there are many, many McDonald's and huge brand new Shell gas stations and department stores and shopping malls and Toyota dealers and GMC dealers and like El Salvador. If you're in the capital city, you could easily think that you're in Vancouver or, a neighborhood of Toronto. It isn't, dirt streets and broken pavement and kind of terrible broken down cars everywhere. It just doesn't look like that.
We have another question that just came in. They're interested in your most recent European tour, and were you able to approach it the same way as this one, avoiding crowds and populated places, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, we tried really hard, and it was difficult on mainland Europe. So we started out, we actually shipped our vehicle from Halifax in Nova Scotia directly to Iceland, and that was way easier and again, way cheaper than everyone thinks it would be. It cost us $3,000 to ship it to Iceland and a rental car, a good rental four-wheel drive in Iceland is $250 a day. So after about 2 or 3 weeks, we were saving money by having our own vehicle. So Iceland is mind-blowing wilderness, incredible. I highly, highly recommend it. Then there's a ferry across to mainland Europe. And then in mainland Europe, we did struggle to get remote and we did struggle to kind of free camp and get away from people. And we ended up down in Sardinia, which is an island off Italy. That was incredible, super wilderness and remote and lots of camping. And then we went all the way down to Tunisia in North Africa, and that was paradise in terms of wilderness and camping and friendly people. Um, so yeah, the main part though, like Switzerland and mainland Italy, it was hard to get away from people. It's busy, it's crowded, the roads are packed with cars.
Hmm. We do have a question here that I think you already addressed in your talk, but someone was asking about the gap between South America and Central America, that gap that you can't drive, so
Hmm.
the Durian Gap.
Yep.
Um, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that anymore. I know you did touch on it in your talk.
Yeah, so they've never built a road from Panama to Colombia. And there's talk of it being political because they don't want people to be trafficked easily or drugs. There's a lot of talk about it would just be too expensive because it's a swamp. And so you'd have to sink pylons down an unknown depth. And it would just cost a fortune to build. So they just never have. Um, and the cars that have done it, I think there's always a kind of controversial take about at some point the car will be floating on some sort of boat, whether it's made out of logs or you pay some locals to put it on a dinghy, or like it has to because there's so much water down there. So then like, does it still count as driving if it floated 100 meters or a kilometer or 10 kilometers? Like and there's people in the Guinness World Records for it, and people have done it more recently on motorbikes. But again, I think they ride their motorbikes until it's literally a wall of jungle. They load their motorbike into some sort of boat. They boat it however many kilometers and then kind of get riding again. Um, but it's quite dangerous these days. I believe there's the Colombia was having their war with the FARC, their resistance fighters, for kind of 20 years or whatever it was, and they were really had a stronghold on that area. So I think it's quite lawless, and I mean it's highly, highly not recommended to go there, basically.
Mhm. We have a question here about whether you came across any solo travelers in Class B camper vans and how you'd compare that to your style of travel that you were doing there.
I never came across anyone during my travel in a vehicle like that, but I know that people do it. I know that it is possible for sure, especially these days with Starlink. There are literally thousands of people on the beaches in Baja and in Mexico and all the way down to Costa Rica who are working from the road. They maybe even have a full-time job back in Canada or the US, and they're living in their van or their big camper van or whatever it is. Um, and I think a real community forms if you're at a beachside town and there's like 10 of you. You're going to have dinner every night. You might go surfing together. Whatever kind of activities you're into, you'll find a community of people who are doing the same thing. So yeah, it's really popular now. There's a lot of people on the road.
Now we have a few other comments kind of in that same vein, talking about um, your kind of desire to pursue your travel dreams, no matter what they are, and that kind of thing. And a lot of people talking about how impressive the trip was. There's a few more questions about your trips in Europe and Africa. One person was asking what vehicles you used for those trips and if any manufacturers have ever offered you one.
I don't know if you can see behind me on the wall, there's a photo of the Jeep I drove around Africa. So I upgraded, I got a four-door Jeep and I put a pop-up roof on it, and it did have all the four-wheel drive goodies. So I had a fridge and a winch and all the kind of off-road stuff. That was an amazing vehicle, and I haven't brought myself to sell it yet. I would love for it to find a home in a museum, actually. Wink, wink. Um, and then for Australia, we had a Jeep Gladiator, so Jeep's pickup truck. And then most recently, we kind of built a big Jeep camper thing. Um, and so you can see Jeep has been a big theme of mine. And we have had some conversations over the years. They definitely know who I am. We've filmed a YouTube video together. Um, but Getting a vehicle from a vehicle manufacturer is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. I think a lot of people assume that with my resume, they would be falling over themselves to give me a vehicle. It just isn't like that. That's not how it, unfortunately, that's not how it goes. And so, no, no manufacturer has ever given me or loaned me or even, you know, helped pay for a vehicle. So I just do this all on my own savings and all on my own, you know, ability to earn an income by selling books and writing for magazines and things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I think that they're missing out. I think that there's definitely something there.
Well,
In that
it,
same kind of vein there, we have someone asking about generating income between trips, but I know you mentioned too working at the hostel. So I'm curious just in general if you feel comfortable touching on it, if there were any tips you had for on the road for generating income and that kind of thing, if that was something you did.
yeah, I feel like back then, you know, we didn't have Starlink and the internet and you know, work remotely. So it was kind of like pick up whatever job you could along the way, which doesn't pay very well because there's always going to be a local who do the job cheaper than you can, other than if you were dealing with tourists. So anything related to hostels or tourism or travel, you could definitely, as an English speaker, you could definitely find a way to be like, oh yeah, you know, I'll guide people or I'll be part of this program. And that was really just, I just figured that out as I went along, and I just would meet people and hang out and talk, and they would say, oh yeah, you know, hey, we have a vacancy out in our hostel in the mountains. Like, do you want to go out there? But these days, I think a lot of people are working while they're on the road. And, you know, people do make money from YouTube and TikTok and things like that. But even if you just have an ordinary office job, even if you know, like a technical document editor or any kind of engineering field or anything that requires, you know, you're on a laptop, whether you do 40 hours a week or people find a way to do 10 or 20 hours a week. And and if you're doing 20 hours a week, you know, at a job in Canada or the US, you will easily earn enough money to easily live a very good life anywhere in Latin America. You know, you could rent an apartment, an Airbnb, and live on the beach and eat out every single meal and still have more money than you can spend, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're getting close to 8 o'clock, so we'll do a speed round of a couple questions here. And then some of these, I think we've already answered a lot of these questions, just asking about kind of general safety we've touched on. There's a question about cleanliness and that kind of thing. One question about any issues with winter weather on your trip.
No, I tried hard to avoid the winter. So I left Alaska just as it started snowing. I was down in Idaho and Wyoming. The snow was chasing me. And then I kept going south to avoid it. And then I arrived in Argentina like right at the beginning of their summer. So then I had a whole summer in Patagonia. And I did hit snow, I think once in Peru and maybe once in Patagonia. But for the most part, I stayed away from it as much as I could.
A question about your photo of Machu Picchu. Did you travel there by train?
I didn't actually know. I drove in the back way, which was a big, rambling, long thing to Hydroelectrica. I camped there at this cool hostel. There's a hot spring, a monkey on my arm. And then I hiked in the train tracks the back way, which is probably illegal, but everyone does it. And then I stayed in, what was the name of that town? Aguas Termales at the base of Machu Picchu. And I got up at like 3 in the morning to hike to the top. And basically, I tried to do everything as cheaply as I possibly could. That was one of my missions because I didn't have enough money, so I had to.
Yeah. A comment here relating to your last question about making money on the road and saying that a lot of Europeans are traveling in Canada doing that remote work kind of thing. So interesting to see that there's a lot of sides to that picture.
Yeah, and interestingly, if you keep your eyes out while you're in Canada, like if you're in Banff or you're in anywhere that's like a tourist draw, you will 100% see vehicles with European license plates on them. They are people who have shipped their vehicle from Europe and will tour Canada and North America and maybe even the whole Pan American. And you see them on a daily basis if you keep your eyes out. Friends just did it from Germany. And actually, when I brought the Jeep back just now from Europe, I paid attention as I drove across Highway 1 and I saw probably like 10 vehicles with like German, Swiss, French license plates on them.
And your photographs, there's a comment about how great they are and if you're an avid photographer.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I made it a goal of mine to try and become a photographer on that trip, on the Pan American trip. And so I was like actively practicing and working on it and trying to improve. And then since then, yeah, I'm a professional photographer these days. So I write for a stack of magazines. I published a photography book from my time in Africa. Yeah, so it's become something that I'm really passionate about and I really enjoy.
Great. Well, we'll just take one more question here. But we've got a couple of comments here that sound like people might be interested in hear about your other travels. So maybe a future Third Thursday talk.
For sure,
I
yeah.
just want
Yeah, if people are interested, I'd be really happy to. I have some fairly wild stories from Africa.
Oh yeah. One quick question about Africa here is if you picked up any languages while you were traveling there.
I learned French on the road. I should have learned here in Canada, but I couldn't handle a classroom. My Spanish counted for Portuguese in quite a few countries, and I tried to pick up Swahili, but by then I was really tired, and I probably learned 50 words. It was really fun. People were really encouraging, but I didn't learn enough really to be good at it.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I find that the Spanish and the Portuguese you can almost get by.
Yeah,
Almost.
I could speak Spanish and they would understand me no problem.
Yeah.
So that was in Guinea-Bissau and Angola and Mozambique. We're all Portuguese speaking. And then I could, if they spoke slowly and a few things like the numbers and money and all of that, I could
Mm.
understand well enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan. We'll just have Grace's parting words here. She just said that she really enjoyed her presentation and she's always heard about the Pan American Highway, thought it was fascinating to imagine that it could actually be done. And she thanks you for telling us about your very interesting experience.
Thanks, Grace. You're very welcome. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to share stories with everyone and thanks so much for coming tonight. I hope you really enjoyed that.